From the moment they're born, fire giants are immersed in a world of martial tradition. Their children hurl molten boulders at each other from across magma streams from the time they can walk. Their games a fiery prelude to their future as warriors. As they grow, formal training becomes central to their lives. Their songs around the hearth and their dances in smoky halls are not just entertainment, but fierce reminders of war and combat. They stand out from their frost giant cousins as their renowned fighting prowess comes not from wild fury, but endless discipline and training, which is only secondary to their legendary crafting skills. The fire giants, more often than not, are contracted by other giant races to craft weapons in exchange for things that they wouldn't bother with gathering themselves, like animal pelts from frost giants in exchange for a true weapon rather than a makeshift spear, or jewelry from cloud giants in exchange for the finest sturdy armor. Did you know that the dwarves learned their skills in blacksmithing from the fire giants? They did, in fact, because they themselves once fell victim to the tyrants, being enslaved for hundreds of years before breaking free from their fiery overlords. A master-crafted weapon from the finest humanoid smith pales in comparison to an average fire giant's creation. In fact, they also craft massive siege engines, and some of the most renowned fire giants are said to have crafted weapons that could slay gods. If only they crafted these artifacts for the forces of good, and small enough for a heroic adventurer to wield. With all of this in mind, let's take a look at the 2014 stat block and see what we can do better. So here we are in the 2014 Fire Giant stat block. What we're looking for here, namely, are a couple key points. We're looking for representation in these areas. It's giant size, so it's huge, which is 2 sizes bigger than an adventurer. We're looking for martial mastery. We're looking for a bit of unstoppableness in this stat block. There are 7,000 pound giants wearing full plate armor, which probably makes them weigh another 2 to 3 more thousand pounds. And another thing that we want to find is something that represents them being beings of iron and fire. So let's look and see if we can find anything that represents that in the stat block. I'm sure your keen eyes already noticed that that is nowhere to be found, but we'll get into it anyways. So, size, type, and alignment. We have huge giant, lawful evil. Pretty self-explanatory, those fit. Then we're going to go to AC, HP, and speed. We have an AC of 18, which is regular plate armor for a normal humanoid gives AC of 18. There's a part of me that really wanted to make this a 20 and call this Fire Giant plate. I called it Fire Giant plate on my stat block, but I didn't make the change to give it a higher armor class for the sake of balance. But we go to hit points, 162, and then we have a speed of 30 feet. Slower than the average giant, but I think it balances out because you have to think they're wearing this heavy plate armor, 7,000 pounds with a massive sword, more than likely. So that concludes AC, HP, and speed. Let's get into the ability scores, saving throws, and skills. So ability scores here, they look completely good to me. I don't think these need any change. If you wanted to even make it more balanced, you could lower their dexterity, but I think, according to what we know of a fire giant, they're actually surprisingly more dexterous than you would see at first glance, being that they're wearing massive plate armor that's probably a couple feet thick. They are surprisingly dexterous, but we'll get into the saving throws. +3 to dex, 10 to con, 5 to charisma. Seems good to me. Athletics skill, very high. That shows that they do have rigorous combat training drills that they probably partake in daily. So I do like that they have an athletic skill, and they are very perceptive from what I've read. Damage immunities, fire. I sure hope it has a fire immunity. We have passive perception of 16. That's pretty aware of its surroundings, rogues, so you better watch out. We have a language of giant, challenge rating of 9, and then a proficiency bonus of 4. That stuff all seems well. Challenge rating is definitely going to be increased with my giant, as you know, I'm sure. Now we get into the very original and epic stat block here for the actions. We have multi-attack. The giant makes 2 greatsword attacks, and then it can throw a rock. Bravo to whoever designed this. We're going to get into my stat block, and I'm going to go over each part of the stat block and tell you why I made the change and what lore it might pertain to. So let's get right into it. Get this off my screen. Alright, I'm looking for Surtur's blessing on this one, as we are going to jump into my stat block here. Nothing changed in the upper left quarter of the stat block, other than I changed the name of their plate armor to Fire Giant plate armor, and that will make sense when we get down into the special traits portion. Still the same movement speed. The saving throws and the skill proficiencies increase slightly because I did increase the challenge rating, which increases the proficiency bonus, so that adds on. So now they're even more perceptive. They still have an immunity to fire, and that concludes the passive baseline abilities. We're going to get into the special traits section of my stat block now. Alright, starting off with the first thing that makes these giants feel like they are these unstoppable forces wearing full armor, kitted out in gear. Unstoppable Juggernaut. While wearing armor, the Fire Giant's armor absorbs blows from attacks dealing less than 20 damage, so they take no damage. If you hit them and you deal anything less than 20, they take no damage. Its movement speed cannot be reduced by caltrops, cold-related magic, difficult terrain, or any physical means such as grappling and restraining by creatures smaller than it. That also counts for Sentinel. For the Sentinel abusers out there, I apologize, but it just doesn't make sense that you would be able to stop this creature that is 2 sizes larger than you and weighs probably about 20 times more than you do. I think that's a flavorful change. Now we get into rune cast weapons. The Fire Giant possesses an average affinity for rune casting, infusing their weapons with ancient fire runes. So this just states essentially that all of their actual weapons that are metal they have deal an extra 2d6 fire damage, and their weapon attacks now count as magical. So that's going to bust through any non-magical defenses, because it just sort of makes sense that if they're enchanting their weapon with fire runes, that it's probably going to be a magical weapon now. And that is, remember, the average Fire Giant. Ordnance Hierarchy. We've seen this on my other giant stat blocks. This is just a role-playing trait that is there to remind you that the giant has advantage on persuasion, intimidation, and deception checks made to interact with giants of lower rank in the ordning. Industrial Mastery. This is another role-playing ability. It's sort of there to it just reminds you that in their forge, the Fire Giant's creations are of exceptional quality, with crafting and repair tasks completed in half the usual time, producing works that rival legendary artifacts. That's there to represent that they are the masters of the forge, even surpassing dwarven craftsmen. Let's say a player character might befriend a Fire Giant. Somehow they convince a Fire Giant to join the forces of good. You can use this as sort of a guideline for if they have to craft a weapon or a structure for the player characters or allies. Then we have Siege Monster. This was taken from Storm King's Thunder. It makes sense, being that they are a war-driven culture. So they make siege equipment. They deal double damage to objects and structures with their weapons and war machines. Heat dependency. This is an interesting one. I looked at the 3.5 Fire Giant, and then I looked at some of its lore, and it said that Fire Giants were vulnerable to cold damage. I didn't give them vulnerability to cold damage, but if their armor is not being worn, they are vulnerable to cold damage, because Fire Giants, they shiver in temperate climates. They love the heat. They need it to survive. So if they weren't wearing their magically heated armor, their Fire Giant plate armor, they would be vulnerable to cold damage. So your players can sort of maybe use that and get into the armory of the Fire Giants and destroy their armor so they can't wear it, to try and weaken their forces, or at least some of them. Because when you see the amount of damage these guys can do, you're gonna say, wow, as we move on to the actions category. So, the actions. This is where the Fire Giant is going to come alive now compared to its 2014 counterpart. You're going to see here, the multi-attack says the Fire Giant uses a battle maneuver if available, then makes 2 greatsword or fist attacks. So if they get disarmed of their greatsword, they still have an option to fight back with their fist. And I still have a stomp ability, don't worry, for you stomp enjoyers out there. It may replace a greatsword or fist attack with a stomp or soot storm, and we'll get into soot storm soon, but let's start off with its huge greatsword that I aptly renamed Massive plus 12 to hit. These are huge greatswords coming down on you. You have to imagine it's probably pretty hard to avoid or block it. Only the most powerful adventurers could withstand the blows from a Fire Giant. So it's going to do 6d6 slashing damage, which is it's essentially taking a great axe and splitting the damage in half into 2 different die. So its baseline damage is actually higher than a great axe. It's just more consistent and less chance of a higher roll. And then they also deal 2d6 fire damage on a swing. So they wield flaming great swords. They prefer to fight with flaming swords. I love some of the artwork that I've found online of them having this like heated flail. So you could easily swap out the greatsword with a flail, a battle axe, a warhammer, anything that you can think of that you would imagine a Fire Giant smith to be using, they could probably be using it. So we move down into Molten Boulder. This is a plus 12 to hit, range of 60 to 240 feet. It does 2d10 bludgeoning damage plus 2d10 fire damage. And if you see, I'll put artwork on the screen of the Fire Giant's boulder. It has like molten magma pouring out of it. They are often warm up their boulders in vats of hot steam and other things that are naturally around them that are very hot. The environment that Fire Giants live in is hostile. It is a hellscape if you are not a Fire Giant or a Fire Elemental. Also, on top of the Molten Boulder's hit, if you're smaller than the Giant, which you will be, your movement speed is reduced by 5 until the end of your next turn. So it's like you're getting smacked with a humongous boulder, you're getting dazed, nearly knocked off your feet. I think that ability is pretty awesome compared to a rock. So we move up here into the fist and the stomp attack. Your average fist attack, if he gets disarmed by the command spell or something, he still has a way to fight back with 3d6 bludgeoning damage. That will heavily cut down on his damage, which is a good thing. It's a tactical decision that the players have made, so they should be rewarded for it. Then we have the stomp attack, and it's the same as all the other giants. The saving throw just keeps getting higher as we climb up in the ordering. So now it's a DC 20 strength saving throw if you get stomped on, and if you fail, you fall prone under the giant's foot. And now we get into the representation of their martial battle drills that they go through from the time that they are born to the time that they become adults. This is called the Fire Giant Battle Maneuvers. It is a recharge, so it can't be used every turn consistently, but it says in the flavor text I put, from birth, all fire giants are taught to embrace their legacy of war through constant, rigorous combat drills. And it means while they are equipped with their battle gear, fire giants can execute various combat maneuvers. Now, as a dungeon master, you sort of take that as you will. You could mean if a fire giant that you made has a shield, so if you're taking this template and you're giving them a shield, they might require their shield to do something, or they definitely require their weapon and their armor to at least do some of these. So the first one is Crushing Overhead Maneuver. Basically, it's the same attack modifier as their sword, but it doesn't deal the sword damage, it does a different separate damage. So when they use this maneuver, if the creature gets hit, they have to make a DC 20 strength saving throw or fall prone, and they take 2d10 bludgeoning damage. Pretty simple, but they can weave that in with their attacks. Then we have the Repulsion Maneuver, and this also, mind you, this has way more range than the Stomp attack. So the Stomp only has 5 feet, this has a 10-foot reach. Repulsion Maneuver. When you're hit with this attack, you have to make a strength save, or you're pushed 15 feet away, or if you're smaller than the giant, which you will be pushed 30 feet away, and then the attack deals 2d10 fire damage. So it's like the runes on the sword. The fire giant channels the elemental energy into his sword, and it blows a vortex of fire out, shoving the creature back if they fail the strength save. We have Sutur's Branding Maneuver. Sutur is the fire giant god, in case those of you that are watching do not know this. So Sutur's Branding Maneuver, I took one of the paladin's Branding Smite ability and I reflavored it into a fire giant ability. So the target takes 3d10 fire damage and they have to make a Constitution saving throw DC 20. If they fail, they take an additional 3d10 fire damage at the start of each of their turns. And if they're invisible, they become visible. They shed dim light in a 5-foot radius. They cannot become invisible until the flames are doused as an action. And then we come to the final maneuver. This is called the Iron Wall Maneuver. And this is sort of just a defensive drill that maybe the fire giants know. And that means that the fire giant can take the dodge action. But remember, this is part of the multi-attack. So if they take this, all creatures have disadvantage on attack rolls against them until the end of, until the start of the giant's next turn. Alright, the next ability here is a really interesting one that I came up with. It took me a couple hours thinking of this one, what to do to give it a once per day ability. This is Soot Storm. And I kind of got this idea from watching an AJ Pickett video, but also I sort of looked at some other stat blocks relating to fire giants, and this one is the fire giant wipes a chunk of soot from its armor. So they have to have been in their forge at least to use this, I would say. Keep that in mind, dungeon masters. Releasing a massive cloud of toxic residue from its forge. All creatures that breathe, except for fire giants and fire elementals within a 15-foot radius, must make a DC 19 Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, a creature takes 6d8 poison damage and is blinded for 1 minute. On a successful save, the creature takes half damage and is not blinded. And then they can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of their turns. So, a fire giant's environment is incredibly hostile to live in as a smaller creature, or a creature that is not a fire giant or an elemental. They use toxic chemicals while they're forging their weapons. There's fumes in the air, and this just sort of represents that stuff building up on them. And they know that creatures can't breathe this in, so they're going to use it to their advantage. They're military geniuses, essentially. And then we come down to Snatch, which you'll notice I don't have massive combatant in the traits anymore, because I feel like it was just taking up unnecessary space and it wasn't adding anything. It was just trying to explain these abilities, but I think they're pretty self-explanatory after thinking about it. So Snatch, this is a full action to do this, so the giant's probably not going to use this as often as something like a hill giant would, but the target creature within 10 feet of the giant must succeed on a DC 20 dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, the creature is grappled and restrained by the giant, and then as a bonus action, the giant can crush, smash, or fling the creature. Crush being it deals 3d6 bludgeoning damage, the creature remains held. Smash is the giant smashes it into a building or the ground, and it deals 4d6 bludgeoning damage, and then the creature lands prone and it is no longer snatched. Fling is the scary one because fire giants prefer to pick creatures up and throw them into a very hot place, which I'm sure you could guess would be a massive pool of molten lava. So if your characters get picked up by this, if they fail that snatch saving throw, Mr. Fighter is going to not have a very good time when he lands 60 foot deep into a pool of lava and takes 18d10 fire damage at the start of each of his turns. So I believe that's going to conclude my fire giant stat block here. I'm going to get into some final thoughts and sort of bring up some concerns that I'm sure people will have about this. So, for my outro, I would like to bring a common situation into the limelight for a moment. There's an old saying that most Dungeons & Dragons games die out past level 10 because high-level player characters seem invincible to most dungeon masters. And dare I say, it's because we're all too scared to truly make formidable foes without crafting something that's just made to TPK. Well, here's the thing. I think my fire giant stat block actually represents what the true average fire giant should be. A terrifying force that shouldn't be trifled with by none other than the most powerful adventurers. After all, they've lasted 1,000 years without being wiped out by a rogue party of do-gooders, right? What stops fire giants from taking over the world, if they're this powerful, is they simply don't care enough to do so. Their only motivation is to pursue their craft in their black citadels deep beneath the Earth's surface. Looking at my stat block now, if just one fire giant worked for the forces of good, they could change the world by crafting legendary armor and weapons that could fell evil gods and terrible beasts, but unfortunately, their society just doesn't care enough about humanoid kind. That's why I think I fixed the fire giant stat block. I think dungeon masters need to start kind of looking at the game from a different perspective. Your players have to prepare when they go to fight something like this. They can't just waltz in one-on-one with a fire giant and essentially stat check them. Like, they need to get everything that they need to their advantage. A weapon that could do cold damage if they can manage to get a giant without its armor on, or climb up to its head and hit it in the face with a what is that frost weapon? The sword with the cold enchantment on it. Bringing potions of invulnerability to sustain a massive hit from a fire giant's weapon. Potions of fire resistance to protect yourself from the environment that they live in. There are ways to make the game more challenging for player characters, and even if a bunch of level 20 characters go into a fire giant citadel where there is 40 to 50 plus giants, plus minions, plus constructs and elementals that they have doing menial labor for them, it's challenging. You can make late game deadly encounters for your players even if they have spells like Power Word Kill. Power Word Kill can kill a single fire giant, sure, but Is it going to deal with the rest of the army and the king himself with his dreadnought fire giant honor guard that's protecting him, plus their siege weaponry that's firing down on them? It should feel like a movie, like an intense fight for their lives. Only 20th level adventurers can go into the fire giant citadel to save the world from the fire giants that are now trying to take over. Essentially, that's more or less what I wanted to sort of bring up for the concerns for people saying that I probably made these too difficult. I think you need to think of the game in a different light. Anyways, that's going to do it for my fire giants. If you like what you see here, subscribe for more, hit the bell notification, and I'll see y'all in the next one.